At the moment, the Gypsy traveller community in this country is facing annihilation. It's being couched in terms of legislation, but what we're actually looking at is a cultural genocide in the same way as other indigenous populations have seen their cultures smashed and destroyed. And at a time like this, we need to be forming alliances with other minority communities in this country, other indigenous populations across the world. These are real dire time for us, where your pursuit of your historic nomadic lifestyle can see you a victim of a 2.5 grand fine, 3 months in prison, and to have your home and your vehicles confiscated by the police. I don't think people realise what the situation is like for travellers right now. And in order to mend the fences that have been broken between the traveller and the black communities, we need to start having dialogue. We need to change the narrative where it's us against each other, and actually, unifying in a sort of solidarity to affect change.
Welcome to the Gwenton Show. Today we've got a distinguished guest with us, Dr. Rachel Stuart, criminologist lecturer from Brunel University. How privileged we are today to have her in the studio, and we've got an amazing conversation for you today. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for coming on the Gwenton Show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you here. And for me, it was to find out more about your background. We've heard some bits about you and the great work you've done to encourage people into academia, and the amount of lives that is changed just by a bit of encouragement. I think that it's an amazing thing, and I just want to say thank you for that, because I could see sometimes you do some stuff and you don't actually see the benefits of it, and to think that other people now within the community are benefiting because you've and help others. I think that's an amazing thing. So it's just about finding out a bit more about you before we get to the academia side. Who are you, and just a bit about your background.
So my name's Dr. Rachel Stuart. I'm a criminology lecturer and researcher at Brunel University. I come from a traveller background on my mum's side, and on my dad's we're Gypsy. So I'm quite unique in that context. There are not many sort of people from my community that have got to a PhD stage. But from an academic point of view, I came into academia quite late. I think I was 45 when I started my degree, and I went all the way through. Did my degree. I did a degree in criminology and cultural studies, a law master's in criminal justice and human rights, and then I did my PhD in criminology. And what started is really, it started off quite simply. I could see the end of my maintenance order looming in the horizon. So I'd planned to just go to uni, study something that I had some experience of, some knowledge of. And then I was just going to, just create a career out of that. But what actually happened is that I was never hearing my story. I never heard anything about travellers or gypsies in any of the academia that I was reading. Everything was always said about us.
Even before we go forward, because for me, I don't want to pretend that I understand the difference, because I've got friends from Irish backgrounds, friends that say that they're gypsies, friends that say they're from the travelling community. And I think we just need to clarify what's the difference, because even recently, I had a friend on the show, Charlotte, and after we filmed that program, someone else called me up and says, "Oh, but I'm an English traveller." And I thought, could you explain the difference between a traveller and a gypsy?
Right, okay. So this is like one of my biggest bugbears, because like GRT is like this kind of acronym that we all get sort of placed under, and it stands for Gypsy, Roma and Traveller. Like Roma are basically largely from Eastern Europe, although sometimes Spain. They've got a really long, honourable history that goes back to India. English gypsies, also the same. They've been in this country for, I think, 600 or 800 years. They've been here a long time, but their origin is from the subcontinent. Travellers are different. We're indigenous to these islands. Okay. So I was reading a report a few weeks ago, and somebody done some DNA testing on some traveller populations, and realised that the traveller population had sort of a section that, isolated itself off from the main body of Ireland like 1400 years ago. So we were here before the Normans invaded. So there's quite a lot of kind of interaction between Ireland and England, but they're different groups, but with a slightly shared history. But the Irish travellers that you tend to find in the UK nowadays are in England because of the housing laws. So it's made it illegal for them to stop in Ireland. Okay. And the same thing that's been done in England now, which is the introduction of a law called the Policing and Sentencing Bill, which effectively makes it illegal to be a traveller in this country, was introduced in Ireland 20-odd years ago to stop people travelling.
So when did that get introduced in this country? I've never heard of it.
So the Policing and Sentencing Policing Crime and Sentencing Bill got introduced in June 2022, and it's an absolutely horrific bill, which means that if you stop outside of an authorised stopping place, you are liable to a £2,500 grand fine, £2,500 fine, 3 months in prison, and to have your vehicles confiscated by the police. And how serious this is. In 2021, Family and Friends of Travellers Gypsy organisation did a survey and found out that there were, I think, 1,656 families waiting for a stopping place, and there were actually just over 100 available. So since the passing of this law, those 1,500 families have now been basically criminalised because there's not enough space for them to stop.
I think the reason why that's such an important point that you've just made there, and information for people watching this, when we then see families with young families and stopping, like let's say on parks and that, you will hear people kicking up a fuss, oh, they're on our parks. Now people understand that it's not because people want to be on your parks, but there's not enough spaces allocated for them to go to.
No, there's not enough recognition of the fact that actually there is, travellers are nomadic. So there's no provision for them to be able to move from place to place. And places where historically we've stopped for like hundreds of years and now closed to us, we can't stop there. So, if you're driving through the country and you'll see like a field with like a big like block of wood, or like a big tree stump or a big lump of concrete blocking the entrance, quite often that's the places where we would have stopped. And now we're not able to do that anymore. That's been stopped.
And these are the things that I've not seen this on the news. I've not seen any newsletters gone out about this. So it's like, if you don't know, you don't know. So imagine a family that is not being informed. They will then be criminalized, not knowing that, wait a minute, you can't stop here anymore. So how many people are then suffering fines or prison sentences because they're just trying to find somewhere to stop?
Well, it's a form of systemic racism where these people are just being squeezed into, there's a drive to push them into a non-nomadic lifestyle, but then there's not a provision for them to live in a non-nomadic way. So there's a kind of, it's a real kind of war that's been launched against the traveller community for like a considerable amount of time. This is not this is just the latest in a long line of legislation that's made traveller lifestyles increasingly more difficult.
Would we then blame that on the census? Because when you look at the census that they normally send out to your house, I think it was the last one, they actually started threatening people that if you didn't fill it out, you'd be prosecuted or fined. Can't remember what threat it was. But for the first time in my life, I've seen people scared. Please send this back because I don't want the people coming and causing trouble with me. If the travelling community are not being given an opportunity to fill out the census, how could anyone then say they know how many families are out there?
I don't think it's a case of being able to quantify how many families are out there. I think it's a case that historically the powerful elites that exist in this country have historically persecuted people who don't want to conform.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but the word villain in English, it's a Norman French word, and it basically a villain was someone who'd run away from the lord of the manor for a year and hadn't paid any of his money to the lord of the manor. So within English law, the definition of a villain, is a poor person who doesn't pay a rich person. Wow. So that tells you quite a lot about the psychology of lawmakers in this country. There's no attempt to be fair.
Yeah, and even some of the cuff chat that we've had, it reminds me of the Windrush generation. And the reason why I say that is a lot of people came here on their parents' passports, paid their taxes, worked in this country for over 30, 40 years, and recently been deported. We've seen a lot of people end up dying. People have thought of suicide. And this was no fault of their own because their documents were destroyed at the Home Office. And again, who then sends out these letters to say to people, well, if you came here on your parents' passport, you're no longer going to be accessing any British funds or no, they call it no access to public funds. So you then become an invisible person in a country that you were welcome to 40 or 50 years ago. And when we look at a lot of the people now, they're actually pleading for indefinite leave. And a lot of people don't know what indefinite leave means. It means you're allowed to stay here until such time that we decide that we don't longer want you here. So from coming here as British citizens and believing your whole life that you're British citizens, I've had people where they've gone to get married and that's when they found out that they were illegal. I've had young people go to university and because of one of the children going to university, the family then get deported because it then triggers something to say, wait a minute, you're illegal. And a lot of people have been deported out of this country when, if you look at it, the head of state of Jamaica is still England. So no decision could be made in that country without England saying yes. But at the same time, people are getting deported back to Jamaica who were considered English people.
So there are kind of similarities with the trauma, but the experience is different because we weren't invited here. We were here when they pitched up.
Yeah.
Our experience is more similar to indigenous populations.
Yeah.
Like the types of populations that you find in North America and Australia who've had a sort of systematic attack against their culture. You know, there was a law passed in the 1890s that made it okay to take children away from what was then called itinerant populations. It's commonly known as the Tinker experiment. So people, you know, travellers and sort of gypsies would have their children removed from them. Scotland has recently made an apology about this.
Okay.
I haven't paid any money, but they said sorry because they do that, don't they?
Yeah.
But England hasn't even acknowledged it. Now, from my own experience, from my own family, that happened to my grandmother. I was with my gran when she died, and she was like, why did they take me? Why wouldn't they let me be with my brothers? They took the daughters, put them into children's homes run by the Catholic Church. And that's a form of systematic attack. And that's the type of racism that gypsy travellers have been experiencing in this country for a really long time. So the same systemic racism that's taken your family to Africa and then brought them under here to England under false pretenses, saying, you know, we're gonna allow you to do this and this and this, and then sort of don't recognise your qualification, are the same people that are systematically coming for us.
Yeah, it's sad because I remember watching a program where the lady went to trace her roots, and she had families that were here from the Vikings. So this whole narrative of this 1950s Windrush nonsense, there's been people here from ever since. You look, some of them were actually in royalty position, but you'll never hear about that. And I think when we look at historical archives, unless we have conversations like this, the new generation that might be on TikTok or other platforms will never be informed of the history.
No.
Because it's all lost. And unless you go and read books, which we know a lot of young people these days, because everything's digital, they struggle to read a book, pick up a hard copy book and read. I think that something we need to have we need to have archives.
We need intergenerational conversations.
Yeah.
Because even a book has to go through, editing. It has to fall in line with certain publishers.
Yeah.
So you're getting a really doctored version of what they want you to know. Actually, you're probably better off to go and find an old person, go talk to them, ask them what time it is.
Yeah. And that's, it's funny you said that. That's a thing that I'm looking to do going forward, where a lot of the elders, their voices are not being heard. And that history is going to go with them to the grave. And unless you take the time out, and a lot of them are willing to talk. This is something that I've found sitting down with my own nan. She's nearly 90 years old now, and her memory's still good. And she remembers way, way back. And unless I sat with her to capture that, I wouldn't have known who she was.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have elderly family members that have still got their faculties and are able to remember all the way back to childhood. And unless that is captured, or even if individuals remember, you will never know where you're coming from or your family's history, because no one's having that conversation.
That's really important, because when they take away your history, like I only recently found out what my granddad's parents' names were. I didn't know who they were, but once I found out who they were, I was able to trace my family way, way back in Irish history. Yeah. I mean, I'm a researcher. If I research you, you're getting found. Yeah? I'm coming.
Yeah.
And what I actually was able to do, because my grand's a traveller, my granddad wasn't. I was able to trace my granddad's family to points in history where they had land, and then you would see, like during the Henry VIII's time, he had to cede his title of king. Like there was like 150 kings in Ireland. Anyone who was the head of a tribe basically was called king. So under Henry VIII, you had to cede your title. Under Cromwell, they came and took your land. So when you've got an idea of history, you've got an idea of like that systematic coming for you.
Yeah, and even that, for the people coming after you to remember that you've come from royalty.
I don't think that's a good thing.
No, not in the sense that the royalty that we're talking about, but that, let's say we're driving down the motorway and sometimes you see this one house in the middle of nowhere. I always say, how did you get the money to buy that?
Let's not get it twisted. Nobody in my family was living in a big house. You might call yourself king, but you're not actually king. But you were a landowner, and you were part of a system. You were part of a society, and what you see is an English attack on that society. Remember, before England went out and colonised, they practiced at home. They practiced on the Irish before they took it. They franchised it. So they were doing what they were doing to other people later. They started doing in England, then in Ireland. Yeah, they practiced. They knew what they're doing. They've they've had a few test runs. So
how did you feel when you was doing that search? Because this is something I always ask. It
was so empowering. Yeah. It was so empowering. And I shared it with all like my cousins and everyone. They love it. Like we found like a sort of place. There's places that I can tell you that we lived there like 200-300 years ago.
Yeah.
But from a sort of point of view, from the traveling part of my family as well, like from my dad's family, I was able to find like documentation of us being sort of like pitched up on the roadside in like really big encampments. Okay. So we're in history. We're part of the framework of this country, but our history is not talked about. We're just othered.
Yeah,
we're just othered.
But the good thing is, at least you went out and found that, and I think if more people, for me, I had to sit down with my gran and my dad and my dad's uncle, so that's my granddad's brother, his last one here, and to find out who I was. Because sometimes you're confused. And one of the things that I get is my last name's not my name. So it's like, I'll get people contacting me on Facebook, hi, we might be cousins. And I'm like, sorry to tell you, we're not. And that alone, I've gone and given my children that name.
Yeah.
So now I'm having to remove the last name because my middle name's my real name. So it's meant to be Gwenton Dennis, not Gwenton Dennis Slowly. Slowly has nothing to do with me. But me removing it, I'm not going to lie to you, I've lived
Liberating.
Yeah, but not only liberating, it's also painful because I've lived as a Slowly. All the jokes, all the stuff that I've gone through from childhood, and it's like removing a part of me, and it's a battle now I'm having to get rid of a name that has nothing to do with me, to live as who I was meant to be in the beginning, but I'm also in pain getting rid of it.
Okay.
So it's not just an easy process of, enough to do with me, get away, because I have become used to being that person who I'm not. And it's now to explain that to my children, explain it to their mums, and only two, because I haven't got loads. So explain it to the two mums and say, look, I'm going to have to change their name because that's not what their name's meant to be. And it's a whole process, which if I didn't find that out, I would have lived my whole life thinking that is my name.
But it's really strange because I don't think anything happens outside the plan.
Yeah.
So I've spent the last year or so doing research. I'm based at Brunel University, like I mentioned earlier on.
Yeah.
But I've been doing a lot of work with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And they invited me as a consultant on a project they were doing about the uptake of COVID vaccinations among Gypsy, Traveller and Roma communities. And they were like, can you come, can you come along and do this with us? Because we don't know anyone else, basically. And, we need someone from the community, otherwise we're not going to be able to interview anyone. And I really didn't want to do it. I was like, you know what? I'm really not down with the idea of sort of situating my cousins as vectors of disease. Yeah. But I spoke to my family about it, and I spoke to my cousin, and my cousin Kelly was like, well, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? If you don't do it, we don't get a voice.
Yes.
So you need to go and do this. And when Kelly talks, we listen, yeah? Kelly's raw.
Yeah.
And so I did this research, and, I don't live on site, like my cousins do, but I don't live on site. I'm sort of I'm in academia, so although I can go to the site, I don't go there much. But what I was hearing was absolutely shocking, what was happening to the traveller community. And so at the same time, I was finding out how deeply connected to these particular islands my family are. And it really gave me grounding to really sort of take on board what I was being told around the excessive levels of policing that the community is experiencing, the horrific forms of racism. So around about the sort of time that I'm starting to realise that actually I'm going to have to start speaking in public about this because there aren't many people in my position to do this, all of a sudden I'm feeling really grounded.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been here for way over 1,000 years, and now you're going to try and start nicking me and not letting us travel around the country the way that we have. So it's given me some real grounding, and actually that was so necessary because what we were finding during this research was absolutely horrific around some of the practices, with the NHS, how they deal with people from Gypsy traveller communities, how the police are dealing with people from Gypsy traveller communities, how much responsibility Gypsy traveller communities were taking during COVID. Yeah. But there was a perception that they weren't taking up vaccinations, which was the impetus for the research in the first place. Okay. So around about the time I'm starting to have to kind of defend my community, all of a sudden I'm feeling really rooted.
Yeah. And what about something that I've always wanted to ask? What about legal services? How do the travelling community engage with legal services?
Oh, you mean how do they engage with us? It's harsh. are incredibly overrepresented in every single area of the criminal justice system. I think I can't remember what they call it. The youth offenders. I think it's about 15% is traveller.
Yeah.
We're massively overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We get extremely harsh prison sentences. Sort of children are overrepresented in the care system. We have a similar kind of demographic in terms of the criminal justice system as other indigenous populations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only people that are more kind of represented in the criminal justice system than black men are traveller men.
Yeah, and I've seen that across the country
Yeah.
within the prison service, where it's like a constant fight, and that's something that I will put forward, where I've personally seen where people have come in the prison estate from travelling backgrounds, and it's like, all right, you're going to try it with us, so we're ready for a fight. But the way that it's spun is like, oh, they're going to cause trouble, but it's not. When you start learning that they're not coming there to cause trouble, what they're saying is, we know what you're going to try and do. I'm not going to put up with your nonsense. And then it's then spun as you're causing trouble. But really, when you sit back and watch the disrespect, certain things that they wouldn't do to other prisoners, they will try it. And you realise, wait a minute here, you are the ones actually starting on people from they come in the prison. So obviously they're going to fight back.
Yeah. I mean, it's really shocking how casual the racism is against gypsy travellers in a way that would not be tolerated for anyone else. So, for example, there was a TV programme a few months ago, back last year, called 60 Days of the Gypsies. And this programme was absolutely horrific. So this guy, I can't even remember what his name was, had like pitched up with some different gypsy families, traveller families.
Yeah.
And some of the kind of the sort of language and some of the imagery that they were using was reminiscent of the same type of stuff that you would hear in 1930s Germany. Yeah. And this is broadcast on Channel 4, which is owned by the government. So the Department of Sports, Media and whatever owns this channel. So they're broadcasting stuff that's so racially loaded. So there's one particular scene where there's a couple of young boys. They film these young boys like hunting in a park, and then there's a sort of footage showing them cooking like basically a magpie and a squirrel. So there's imagery of them cooking vermin, and you see those kind of tropes around vermin in 1930s Nazi campaigns. You see it in the type of rhetoric that you saw in Rwanda before the genocide. There's a very genocidal undertone towards the way that Gypsy Roma traveller people are being sort of portrayed.
And would we, because this is something that I've had other people from travelling community say to me privately, Gwenton, the problem is money. A lot of these production teams come, we'll give you 50,000, just let us have access. And they're not knowing once they get access, they're going to edit the thing and make it look a certain way, which misrepresents the whole community.
I think it's more systemic than that.
Yeah.
Because if a sort of production team came up to you and offered you £50,000 and said to portray sort of like black men in a way, it would never get past. It's never going to get through. So it's a more sort of systemic thing.
I think the most painful thing, which why I'm glad even that me and you are able to have this conversation, is, and your cousin's right, somebody has to be the voice for the travelling community. Sometimes when your community is so private, the minute that you let someone in, give them your trust, and then they go off and spin it another way, it then sets you back another 20 years because it's like, we actually trusted you and this is what you've done. So I think it is good to have somebody speaking for the community that is not going to do that nonsense that those production teams have come in and done. Because if you think about it, a private community, everyone's sitting there thinking, I really want to know more. and then the one thing you see is negative. It's like, who then comes out and says, wait a minute, see that program that you watched last week? That's not how we live. And if nobody says that, and it happens again, another production team comes in, does the same nonsense again, it then makes people believe that, wait a minute, is this true? And that's why I'm glad that we're now making it clear, all of those nonsense that's been aired on these TV programs is not representative.
Governments constantly need others.
Yeah.
They need someone to hate on, to distract from what they're doing. Okay? Unlike most marginalized communities in this country, and I'm not going to use minority because actually there's so many minorities. Actually, we're talking a global majority.
Yes, yeah.
But there aren't very many minorities like gypsy travelers who have no one fighting their corner.
Yeah.
You know? Black community, very vocal. Asian community, very vocal. Yeah. But if you notice, the rhetoric around othering is always around those marginalised communities that cannot speak for themselves. Yeah. So we're a very, very easy target. You know, we're very easy to other.
Yeah. And even it's funny, something that we spoke about off air, where even I had to check myself, where speaking with a friend, and she says to me, Gwenton, you're lucky. And I was like, what are you talking about? She says, we can't even book a venue without having to get a country person to book it for us, because the minute that they find out that we're travellers, they're going to say no. So we're having to get other people outside to book the venue. And it hit me because I'm like, you know what? Like, sometimes things that we take for granted, we don't see that other people might not have the same benefits. So, and that's something that I want to highlight, that sometimes people run around, oh, we're being persecuted and all that. There's other people that are having it worse.
But that doesn't make your persecution any less.
Exactly.
But it's almost like we have to, you know, and that's how clever that kind of divide and conquer is. Yeah, it's almost like, oh, you're fortunate because you're not you.
Yeah.
And it's not like that. Yeah. We all suffer the same persecution. They
just
take
in
time.
Just in a different way.
Yeah, they take sort of pot shots at different people. Like, you know, all of a sudden the worst thing you could possibly be is Albanian because of the type of rhetoric that people are saying about Albanians.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same deal. They're constantly looking for people to demonize so they can distract from what they are doing.
Yeah, it's actually painful to watch, because even for me, I say to family members and young people that I work with, it's like, you have to, when you're young, just believe that there's traps everywhere, and try not to step on any of the traps, please, because the minute you step on the traps, it's then you're in the youth offending service, criminal justice system, court system, police PNC database. Your DBS is now getting messed up. You might end up in prison. And because of all the times you've been stopped and searched, because what they preach to young people is, don't worry, when you're 18, everything disappears. So young people believe they could do whatever they want till they're 18. Then when they turn 18 and they go and apply for something, even college now, I've got a lot of clients that can't get into college because they've got a criminal record. And now they have to disclose that to the college. So you've gone through the system, maybe not have gone to prison, but because you've gone through the system, you can't get an education. So what are you then left to do? If you can't study, what are you meant to do then?
And I think it's a discussion about also as well that there's, even with what you've just said, it's almost like there's an assumption that somehow you've made a mistake. There's never a discussion about how predatory, like, say, things like certain police forces can be when they kind of want to penalise certain types of people. There's an active, there's almost like an active desire to incarcerate. So, for example, when I was interviewing sort of people about you know, vaccinations, because I'm interviewing people in the community, they'll talk to me about other things. And I spoke to this young guy, he was in his early 20s, and he's very literate. He's been to college, so he acted as a responsible adult for a lot of the younger sort of traveller kids if they're getting nicked. So during lockdown, and he lives in a small town in the West Midlands, the police have called him up and said, "Can you come to the station because so and so's here and he needs a legal, a responsible adult so we can interview him." So he's driven to the police station, and on the way, the police have nicked him. Yeah, for breaking COVID regulations. This is a small town, so the police know who he is. They know where he's going. So they've done that deliberately. Yeah. So then, they've prosecuted him, but that child who's been arrested has now been interrogated without a responsible adult there. Now, it's been known for the 250 odd years that prisons have been part of this criminal justice system. Remember, prison's relatively new. Yeah. That if you incarcerate a father, his children got 50% chance of going to prison. Yeah. If you incarcerate a mother, her children have a 70% chance of going to prison. If you incarcerate both of them, well, you might as well just go and put your grey tracksuit on, bang on the door because you're going to prison. Yeah. So there is a desire for this constant churn through the prison system because Tories and Labour both got voted in on the tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. And we know what the crime they're talking about. We're talking about the relatively low-level crime of the poor as opposed to their criminal activity.
And that's something that I can say that is true. If you're able to go without using legal aid, you will get one of the top barristers from Old Square or New Square, and they will find some loophole to get you the less charge or no charge. Yeah. When you're on legal aid, let's say it's £4,000. £4,000 meant to last a year tops. If you're on a trial that's going to last 18 months, you've gone now 6 months over the budget.
Yeah, £4,000 for a year is 80 quid a week. What solicitor's going to work for that?
Exactly. And then if it's a murder case, the amount of paperwork that they have to go through, CCTV, forensics, cell site could be thousands of pages of cell site. Just plead guilty.
And this is what really resonated with me. When I started my degree, by the end of the first year of my degree, I was so livid I could barely speak. Like literally, I was just angry because of the stuff that I was reading, the stuff that I was finding out, and the stuff that wasn't being talked about.
Yeah.
And what I've come to realise is that you've got some people within the community need to learn to speak the language of the oppressor in order to tackle the oppressor. Yeah. They don't, people will shut up and listen if you've got letters in front of your name. They might listen if you've got them afterwards. They'll listen to you if you've got letters in front of your name. But then that comes with a responsibility.
Yes.
That comes with a responsibility.
But it also makes you vulnerable as well.
Totally.
Because you then become the person of target. Because
my kids are grown.
and what you just said there is something again. If you've got young children, you have to be careful how you're speaking out.
My children are grown, and my children are also mixed. So my ex-husband's Trinidadian Jewish, so my kids are like a quarter black, half Jewish, Irish, traveller, Arawak. There's everything in there. Yeah. And they're as leery as you could imagine.
Yeah. But it is good. Yeah. It is good. My thing is, I agree with that. I think everyone should know their rights. The problem that we have that other communities have, and coming back to what you just said and also family members, we need somebody that is trusted to speak. Yeah. Somebody that is respected to speak. Let that person speak and represent. We then support that person because it's a big job. So that person's going to need support because we don't know if you're going to be okay today or tomorrow when you have to go and deal with something. Got your own life going on, and next thing you've discovered something so dark and dangerous. You might need to offload to someone.
I mentioned the 49 cousins, yeah.
Okay. Well, you got 49 people to talk to. So we need, and I think if anything taken away from today is structure. Going forward, we can't have either no one speaking up or too many pockets of people speaking up. Also as well, something me and you spoke about off the call. We cannot have people that shouldn't be speaking up because it becomes dangerous. I'm talking about the ones that want to be famous, social media famous, the ones that are ego driven, the ones that are asking for help but looking at as leaders. So we got some people within the community where they're crying out for help, but instead people look at them as, because you're the most known person on social media, you lead us. But really that person's saying, I need help myself.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're obliquely referring to, if I'm not wrong, is the incident that happened in Ashford, which was horrific. Watching children hurting other children is always horrific. But what was even more horrific was basically a lynch mob then outside of that family's home, and that sort of desire for certain individuals to bring them, raise themselves in that context. When you've got like 100 people baying outside someone's house, how's that not a lynch mob? That's always a lynch mob.
And also the trauma. Yeah. We have to think about children first and foremost.
But also as well, even those people outside that house, when I found out what had happened about that poor girl getting beaten up, it's like, first of all, I was like, that timing could not be worse for us. Yeah. It's like, probably the one community that's got more in common with the traveller community is the black community, and now we are at loggerheads. Who benefits from that? Yeah. Who benefits when the two most marginalised communities are at war? That was the one thing. And then the other thing is like, how then do we get back to a position where we actually can recognise the frustration in both of those communities?
Yeah.
The frustration that was shown by those people outside that house. All you see is like a frustrated population who have experienced systemic racism, expressing their anger towards another marginalised community that's experienced systemic racism. So how then do we move on from that? And really the only way we move on from that is through a loving conversation.
Yeah.
So at my university, we've got this little project called Brunel 365.
Okay.
We're also lucky enough to have Benjamin Zafanara at our university.
Yeah, amazing guy.
He's awesome. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. So we did a recording with him. We talked about about his view of the traveller community, and we talked about how the sort of like the common bond between sort of our oral histories and the music, because that's how you make change. Yeah. Like, it's not laws that we can rely on to make change. Yeah, it's how people deal with each other. It's recognizing that you're not the enemy. Yeah, we've both got the same enemy.
Yeah, love overcomes everything in the end, and I think unity is better than divide. I think once everyone understands that we're all in pain here, and let's work through the pain together instead of trying to trample on you, cause you more trauma. And I think sometimes people like to inflict pain on others to make themselves feel good.
Well, we live in a really dysfunctional society, don't we? Where the majority of people can't actually like live properly, and very, very few people are able to live really well. Like our whole society is really fragmented. But actually, it's the same few people that cause the pain. Yeah. So you never look down or to the side for your enemy. Your enemy, you always look up.
Look up, yeah.
I'm not going to get a Kyla on this, but it's the same sort of rhetoric.
Yeah.
But I just don't think people realise how vulnerable the traveller community is, and how close we are to a cultural genocide. Like I said, when my grandmother got taken away from her family when she was a child in the 30s, on the housing estate that I grew up on, there was like loads of like second generation travellers and gypsies, and all of the older people, like I'd be walking to the shop with my gran, she'd stop and speak to her mate Oshie or Mary or whatever, and they'd all been in children's homes together, like a whole generation.
So they had that bond.
Yeah, no, they didn't. They didn't have a bond. They'd been taken from their families. So actually, there's a cut of the culture.
Yeah.
That's how you attack culture. You take children away.
I was speaking to someone last night where they were protesting historical child abuse, and they were outside their old children's home in Shirley Oaks protesting, and the police turned up and thought they were trying to break in the place, and you could just feel the pain through the video because they were all in their 60s, going on 70s, and they're still hurting from what had happened to them in those children's homes. And a lot of them just wanted someone to even just say sorry. And I think sometimes that's the problem, where people like, well, we weren't in post then, it's not our business. And that doesn't help the trauma that someone's gone through. And if you're going to take up a job knowing that the person that had the job before you has destroyed people's lives, I'm talking people are still suffering the scars and probably never had a full life because of the sexual abuse they've gone through in those children's homes, and no one's ever said sorry to them.
But I think it's naive for us to expect them to apologise, and even if they do apologise, it's always a very superficial apology.
Yeah, money. They've paid them. I remember my business partner, before he died, he was in the children's home and he was beaten. He said not sexually abused, and they paid them all just under 100,000 each, and promised to freeze their council tax for 3 years. And as they were going for another set of damages, he passed away. So I'm not sure if his wife or someone else received the payment for that. But what money is going to fix someone at 60, 70 after you've damaged them?
Exactly. But also as well, let's be honest about it. I mean, wasn't it only like 2015 that we stopped paying the compensation to the former slave owners that lost their slaves? You know, so there's that kind of idea that there's these performances of apology. It's sorry we did this, but 100,000. That's just about going to cover your. That's going to cover your counselling. It's not.
If that, depending on what council you go to, because it's like you see people once a year they march for reparations, and it comes back to who's the reparations going to be paid to, and how, and these are the things that we have to look at. So, if I was to ask you, what do you think needs to be in place to bring about change?
Okay, so there needs to be a review of the law that's just been introduced for travellers. The law that makes it illegal for them to stop. There needs to be a review to look at the impacts of that type of racially loaded legislation. Needs to be reviewed. What's the impact that's having? We need an outside body, someone outside the UK, because at the moment we are so isolated. It's like we're locked indoors with the abuser. You know, so we need someone like, you know, the United Nations,
UN,
to actually sort of like look at what's going on with the travelling community in this country, and to actually sort of like speak out. We need people we need allies that have been through the same experience and have come through, who've had some victories. We need to connect with other Indigenous populations. We need to reconnect with the Black community in a significant way, because all of the minorities are actually the majority, and we're all being systematically harmed by the same small core of people.
So would you say then, if we organise like a conference and we had a round table with some actions, that would be a good start?
Yeah.
I think we need to get that done then.
I think the only way that you're ever going to change anything is by giving people space to talk.
Yeah, but
and to hear each other.
Not just talk.
To hear each other.
Yeah, to hear each other. We need to have clear action, because we can't be here in the next 30 years having this conversation.
But we're doomed to have this conversation in 30 years if we don't learn from our history.
Yeah, but we need some sort of action so people know that all the stuff that's been going on behind closed doors need to stop. We need to raise more awareness, and also as well, try and understand our neighbours better. Because I think by speaking to you, I've got a better understanding. The people that will watch this podcast will get a better understanding. And it's to understand that love overcomes everything. Yeah. And we've all got one life. So for me, I want everyone to live a full and happy life. I don't want to know that anyone's living in pain or feeling like they have to just adjust because nobody's going to fight for them. It's like the people that live out in the rainforest. They've been there minding their business for years. All of a sudden, people have come in and pushing them into a little corner. We've been in these rainforests for hundreds of years, minding our business. Why do we need a T-shirt? When you look now, you see on the TV, people that live in the rainforest, they've gotten T-shirts, caps. They didn't need the T-shirt or cap. Somebody's gone there, tried to exploit them and left them with those T-shirts and caps. They weren't catching cold before.
But I think this is all part of the same thing, though, isn't it? This is like decolonisation, and decolonisation has to come on multiple levels, you know, and we really try and push that at Brunel. We try to kind of encourage our students to think that actually you have a unique view of the world. You are made up of all your experiences. You're made up of the people that came before you, and you will have a unique view on the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, that no one else will have, and that view is important, and we need to hear that. So I'm very open with my students that I come from a traveller background, and it allows them to be open about where they're coming from as well, because actually there are 1,000 different knowledges. There are 1,000 different ways of looking at the world, not just one. You know, there's like education is really important, but it can't just be me emptying knowledge into you. It's got to be you bring what you have, I bring what I've got, and let's create something together. Yeah. You know, and that's the ethos that I work from, and that's the ethos that we work from at Brunel as well. We've just started a criminology degree there, like last year, and it's a very critical view of the world.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to take a trip down there. Well, Rachel, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for coming on. And as we said, we're gonna keep the conversation going.
Please.
And we will be looking out for this conference.
Yeah.
And whoever's out there that want to actually bring about change, please be a part of this change, because everyone is entitled to live on earth in peace. Earth belongs to nobody. Thank you for listening.